All right, let's get right into it. We're going to be looking at one of the most incredible periods in all of history, those 500 years between 300 and 800 AD. This is really the story of how a persecuted underground faith was hammered and shaped, almost literally forged into an institution that would go on to define Western civilization.
And our story starts in fire. It's 303 AD, and the Emperor Diocletian launches what history calls the Great Persecution. You have to understand, this was the Roman Empire's last, all-out, most vicious attempt to completely wipe Christianity off the map. I mean, the stakes were everything. This was a fight for the soul of the empire itself.
But you know what? It didn't work. The persecution failed. And just look at the toll it took on the guy who started it all. This account from the historian Lactantius, wow, it doesn't paint a picture of some triumphant emperor, it shows a broken man. It's like the attempt to crush this new faith ended up crushing him instead.
So this moment, this imperial failure, it wasn't just an ending, it was a brand new beginning. See, all that pressure, all that persecution, it hadn't destroyed Christianity, it had tempered it, made it stronger, like steel. And now, something was about to shift in a way no one could have predicted.
So, how on earth did that happen? This first section, well, it covers one of the most whiplash-inducing reversals in all of history. Christianity's journey from being a forbidden sect to becoming the very heart of imperial power.
And it happened fast. I mean, breathtakingly fast. 306, Constantine comes to power. By 313, his Edict of Milan basically makes Christianity legal. The persecutions are over. Then, just a few decades later, in 380, it's not just legal, it's the official state religion. Think about that. In less than one person's lifetime, Christians went from hiding out in the catacombs to advising emperors in their palaces.
But this incredible victory brought a totally new kind of problem. A new crisis, really. Okay, so you've won. But if everybody's a Christian now, what does being a Christian actually mean? The faith was full of all these different traditions, different beliefs. Suddenly, they had to figure out how to create one single unified faith for an entire empire.
And that brings us to this huge intellectual battle. This wasn't a fight with swords and shields, this was a war of ideas. It was this intense struggle to define the very core of Christian belief, and it was led by some of the most brilliant minds of the age. You know, to build a unified belief system, the church first had to figure out what it was not. And that's where the idea of heresy comes in. A heresy wasn't just someone having a wrong opinion. It was a fundamental challenge that forced the church leaders to think harder, to define their own beliefs more clearly. As one source puts it, these challenges, yeah, they were vexing for sure, but they ended up bringing a ton of clarity to what the faithful really believed. And at the heart of it all was this fundamental difference. The church was basically arguing that its teachings weren't just one opinion among many. They were revealed truth, something definite, certain, and coming directly from God. Individual opinion, on the other hand, well, that came from the human mind. And because of that, it was always going to be full of doubt and contradiction. And these were the heavy hitters, the guys who built that intellectual foundation. You had Ambrose, this unbelievably courageous bishop who famously told emperors that they were in the church, not above it. You had Jerome, the genius scholar who gave the entire Western world a single unified Bible in the common language, Latin. And then, of course, you had Augustine, just a towering intellect whose work became the blueprint for Western theology for like the next 1,000 years.
So while all this intellectual bricklaying was happening, another massive project was going on right alongside it, building the organization. I mean, if the church was going to govern millions of people, it needed a government. And where did it find its model? In the very empire it was slowly replacing.
And this was the question that was bound to come up. Okay, so you've got these brilliant theologians arguing, but what happens when they disagree? Who gets the final say? Who is the ultimate judge of what's true? The church basically needed a supreme court.
For the Western Church, the answer to that question became the Bishop of Rome. Now, this didn't happen overnight. It was a long process built on a few key pillars. First, the theological claim that they were the successors to the Apostle Peter. Second, the simple prestige of being in Rome, the imperial capital. Third, you had popes like Leo the Great who proved they could lead and settle huge disputes. And finally, it was just practical. They adopted Rome's amazing administrative structure to actually govern everybody.
And this quote, it just captures the historical weight behind that claim. The authority of Rome wasn't just about logic or location. It was rooted in this deep, deep history of sacrifice and martyrdom, stretching all the way back to the very beginning.
So at this point, the church has a defined faith and a clear structure of authority.
It's become this incredibly formidable institution. But how would it hold up when it was truly put to the test? Well, that brings us to a huge conflict that put the church and the emperor on a collision course.
The whole thing was about icons, religious images. For centuries, they'd been a huge part of worship, especially in the Eastern Empire. But in the 8th century, this powerful movement springs up saying, no, these are idols. This is a violation of God's law. And who is leading this movement? None other than the Byzantine emperor himself, Leo the Isaurian. And he didn't just argue against icons, he declared all-out war on them, ordering them to be destroyed everywhere. And the actions of these iconoclasts, which literally means image breakers, were just systematic and brutal. They were publicly burning paintings, raiding people's homes to take their religious art. They melted down priceless statues. And this part is just dripping with symbolism. They took that gold and silver from statues of Jesus and the saints and minted it into new coins stamped with the emperor's own face.
But you have to understand, this was never really just about art. The church, led by the Pope in Rome, fought back fiercely, because the real battle was over that fundamental question. When it comes to faith, who has the final authority? Is it the head of the state, or is it the head of the church?
And the church's victory in that struggle pretty much cemented a new reality in the West. Over these 500 years, something massive and permanent had been built. A new world order, really, had been forged.
Let's just pause for a second and appreciate the sheer scale of this transformation. In 300 AD, you have a persecuted minority with a bunch of different beliefs and no real central structure. By 800 AD, it is the dominant state religion with universal agreed-upon creeds, a centralized hierarchy, and a clear authority structure run by popes and councils. It's a completely different world.
So through all these trials, persecution, intense debates, political power struggles, Christianity was hammered and shaped from a simple movement into a powerful institution, one with the intellectual clarity and the organizational muscle to stand up on its own.
And here's why that matters so much. This institution would actually outlive the Roman Empire. When Rome fell, the church became the vessel, the lifeboat that carried Roman law, Greek philosophy, and its own scriptures through the centuries that followed, laying the foundations for the entire Western world as we know it.
Which leaves us with one last huge question to think about. An institution had been built that was now powerful enough to challenge emperors and to define reality for millions of people. So, how would that power be used? How would it go on to shape not just Europe, but the entire world for the next 1,000 years? Well, that is a story for another time.